Rabbi Kaplan and I have had a deal that, and it doesn't always end up being this way, but we always try. I think it should always be this way, but you never know. That no one leaves this class until he doesn't want anybody in his class until they've seen Vata Tetzava, Zos Chukas, and Be'er Mishteyasov. Those three Maimer of the Rebbe, at least. Meaning, obviously, there's other Maimer that they've seen, but that they've learned those three Maimarim well, so that they have, because that's Aleph base in the Rebbe's view of the world. Those three Maimarim. Now, there are obviously many, 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 many more, but this is one of the Maimarim that is very unique to the Rebbe, and there's a sugya in this Maimer that the Rebbe deals with that the Rebbe deals with more than any of the other Rebbe. Mm-hmm. And we'll see what that is. Now, the Maimer was said in Yud Beis Tammuz Tafshin Chavtes, that's 1969. Yud Beis Tammuz, of course, is an auspicious date for two reasons. First of all, it's previous Rebbe's birthday, so that's why the Rebbe actually starts explaining the Kapitel Tehillim, the chapter in Tehillim that applied to the Friedrich Rebbe that year, which is Tzadi, which is Tefillah L'Moshe, right? Shuva, Shuva, Hashem Adma, Tzayvei, Nachem Alav Adecha, that Kapitel, which was the Rebbe's Kapitel in Tafshin on Beis, which was that Niggin that we sang and still sing. Mm-hmm. So the Friedrich Rebbe's chapter that year was chapter 90. And so the Rebbe talks about that in the middle of the Maimer, but it's also, of course, the day that the previous Rebbe got out of jail. When the Rebbe was arrested in 1929, 27, 29? I'm not sure. 29 or 27? I'm supposed to know this. I don't remember. Right? I mean, I mixed those two up. It's all right. In the late 20s. When you don't know something, just figure out how to say it in such a way that it looks like you do. Right? When the Rebbe was arrested in the late 20s by the Soviets, and ultimately there was a death sentence, previous Rebbe, that was commuted to 10 years in Siberia, which was commuted to 3 years it's called internal exile. It's not Siberia. And the Rebbe was sent to a place called Kostroma. So on Gimel Tammuz, on the third day of Tammuz, that's when the Rebbe was told that he could leave the prison and go to Kostroma, and he was taken to Kostroma, and spent only 9 days there, and then was set free. But it was a public holiday on Yud Beis, so the Rebbe actually got out on Yud Gimel, so we celebrate 2 days, Yud Beis, Yud Gimel, Shabbos. And that was generally the second most Leibedik Verbringen every year. I mean, obviously, for bringing his labor, depending on what's going on, etc. But in general, the most labor for bringing the year by the Rebbe was generally Yud Tes Kislev. It was just that for bringing that was different than all others, and Yud Beis Tammuz also was a Farbrengen, always an incredibly special Farbrengen by the Rebbe. Right? You could see that the Simcha of the Rebbe was. Beyond any, a normal day. So this Maimer was said on Yud Beis Tammuz. Now Yud Beis Tammuz that year, as you can see, was a Shabbos Parshas Chukas Balak. So the Rebbe said there was another Farbrengen. I'm not sure whether it was Meitzi Shabbos or Sunday night. There was another Farbrengen with a microphone and another Maimer called Tefillah L'Moshe, based on the chapter that was going to be the Friedrich Rebbe's chapter that year. Chapter 90, Tzadi. So those two Maimarim go together. There's a certain question the Rebbe asks here that he only really answers there. The Rebbe is going to discuss Tefillah L'Moshe in this Maimer. We'll talk about that. So it's a certain hemshech, this Maimer and the Maimer that the Rebbe said a day later. Mm-hmm. Those two Maimarim are both printed in Melukat Hei. Okay, Maimarim Melukat Hei. If you don't know, I'll explain very quickly what that means. Right, because it's a little less understood now because they printed it in 4 volumes and they did it in terms of 3 months, 3 months, 3 months, 3 months. So people don't really appreciate anymore how it originally came out, which is one of those things. There's advantages and disadvantages to the way they do things. right? Changing things. So in Tafshin Mem Zayin, the Rebbe started editing Maimarim. What does that mean? A Maimer, the Rebbe had said in early years, he asked Rav Yoel Khan to write it up. The Rebbe would edit it. It would go back and forth between them until an edited Maimer showed up. Right? Edited meaning the Rebbe would write footnotes. If you were to look at the actual transcript of the Maimer, or a Maimer the Rebbe said during the week, if you listen to the Maimer that the Rebbe is saying and then read the Maimer, the edited Maimer in the book, it's not always the same, right? There'll be things taken out, things added, orders changed. An edited work, a written work is not a spoken work. That's why teachers are bad writers. Generally, editors tend to edit teachers a lot, because teachers, when you say something, you say it 3 times, different ways, in order to get the student to understand it. You'll say it one way, and then you sort of say it a slightly different way, and then say it a slightly different way. So that's the way teachers talk, right? They'll say things. Okay, so when you're reading something, if you don't get it, just read it again. You don't have to say it again, but the teacher will say it again, right? So now, in my Maimer, generally the Rebbe wouldn't say it again, but anyway, an edited Maimer is something unto itself. So edited Maimer started coming out in Tafshin Mem Zayin. That's 1987. 86, meaning September. The beginning of the year was in September, obviously. Before we turn to a number before they do, because we're always a step ahead. The Maimarim that came out in the year Tafshin Mem Zayin, Tafshin Mem Ches, 1987-88, they were put in a volume called Sefer Maimarim Melukat. Melukat means collected. Likutei Sichos, a collection of Sichos, right? Base, right? Volume 2. Because there was something called Sefer Maimarim, a collection of Maimarim. Didn't have an aleph on it because there wasn't a base. It's just called Sefer Maimarim. It was a collection of Maimarim. A lot from Tafshin Lamed Ches, because that's when they did it. And then other Maimarim, right? From a little later. Okay? They did it later than Lamed Ches, but a lot from Lamed Ches. Base. So Tafshin Mem Zayin and Mem Ches is Melukat base. Tafshin Mem Tes, 1989 is Melukat Gimel. Tafshin Nun, 1990 is Melukat Daled. Tafshin Nun Aleph, 91 is Melukat Hei. That's what you're looking at. All right, this is Melukat Hei. Yeah. And Tafshin Nun Beis, 1992, is Melukat Vav, which ends with Vata Tetzava, because that was the last edited Maimer that we got from the Rebbe. So Rebbe did that Maimer came out Purim Katan Tafshin Nun Beis, and the Rebbe fell at the oil 2 weeks later, 10, 12 days later. So Maimarim Melukatim are special Maimarim. Now, this volume means both of the Maimarim. Why am I telling you all this? First of all, you have to know this. But both of the Maimarim we just mentioned that were said in the 2-day span on Yud Beis Tammuz Tafshin Chavtes, they're both in this volume, Tafshin in Hay. What's interesting is the first Maimer said is later in the book, because the first Maimer said is on. It's a Yud Beis Tammuz Maimer. It's printed in the as well. You see, it says here, Kuntras Chag. This something like this would show up exactly like this. It would look just like this. It's nice you made this little pamphlet. You would go to shul on Shabbos, and on the bima there would be 40 of these. Why? Because that new edited Maimer just came out, and that was it for davening the next day. Because all anybody wanted to do was learn the Maimer, right? So there'd be a new Maimer that just came out that day, right? So you'd get this, and everybody would sit down and start learning the new Maimer that just came out, right? And when did it come out for? It came out Kuntres Chagagula Yud Beis Yud Gimel Tammuz Tafshin Nun Aleph, 1991. So that's Melukat Hei. Right? All of these that came out that year are in this book. Right? So this came out, this Maimer that we're going to learn came out for Yud Beis Tammuz. The second Maimer the Rebbe said, 2 days later, a day and a half later, this is printed as the Yud Aleph Nisan Maimer here. in Tafshin and Aleph. Why? Well, what kapitel was the Rebbe starting to say in Tafshin and Aleph on Yud Aleph Nisan? Sadi, Tfilu L'Mesha. So there's a mimer on Tfilu L'Mesha, which the Rebbe said about the Frierdiker Rebbe's same birthday of the Frierdiker Rebbe. The Rebbe said a mimer about that chapter in Tehillim. That's in here. Right? That was the day after this mimer. And so that mimer was printed back here in the Yud Aleph Nisan. Here's the Tfilu L'Mesha. Kuntras Yud Aleph Nisan Tafshin Nun Aleph. Right? What's the mimer? Open up. Yud Gimel Tammuz Tafshin Chaf Tes. The day after this. Right? Okay. They're printed in a different order, obviously, because the focus of this mimer is the Tehillim. The focus of this mimer is Chukas. What's a choik? Okay? Say that. Fine. Okay, let's see this amazing mimer. It's an amazing mimer. V'yadaber Shem el Moshe. Zos Chukas. This is the choik of the Torah, which is an interesting thing to say, as opposed to saying Zos Chukas HaPara. This is the choik of Paraduma, the red heifer. It doesn't say that. Right? Twice in the Torah it says Zos Chukas HaTorah, in Parshas Chukas and in Parshas Matris, also the Midbar. Over there, Rashi says that Zos Chukas HaTorah is talking about Paraduma. The same thing this is talking about. That there it doesn't say, it just says Zos Chukas HaTorah. Here it says explicitly what the choik is. It's talking about Paraduma, it's talking about the red heifer, which of course is used to purify someone who has become Tamei Mace, who's been connected to, has touched something, a dead person, etc. Okay? There is another place in the Torah where it says Zos Chukas, it says Zos Chukas HaPasach, Pesach, Korban Pesach. But Israel says Zos Chukas HaPasach, which makes sense. Why does it say Zos Chukas HaTorah, which we're obviously going to ask? Why is Paraduma Zos Chukas HaTorah? Zos Chukas HaPara. This is the choik of Paraduma. Now, what's a choik? A choik is a law, a mitzvah that has no basis in rationale. In other words, you and I can't explain it based on human intellect. But we'll see what that means. We'll have much of the discussion here is going to explain to us what's a choik, what's a mishpat, what does that all mean? What's the difference between Kadosh Baruch Hu's chokhmah, Kadosh Baruch Hu's ratzon? What's the source of mitzvahs, etc. Which is something extremely important to understand. V'yadaber Shem el Moshe, and is a sugya that our Rebbe deals with more than any of the other Rebbe. That particular sugya in Chassidus, sugya is like, a topic. Zos Chukas HaTorah, v'yichu elecha paraduma. They should bring to you a paraduma. Upirish Rashi, v'yichu elecha. They should bring to you. Now, obviously, there's a problem that Rashi's answering. If Rashi's explaining those words, there must be a question that's bothering Rashi relative to those words. And Rashi says, li'olam hi nikras al shim. This will always be called on your name. Para sha'asa Moshe b'midbar. The para that Moshe did in the midbar. So there was a paradum in the midbar. They made a paradum in the midbar. All told, 10 parot adumot in history. There have been 9. The 10th, the Rambam says, Mashiach will make the 10th. We'll do the 10th paradum. Okay, now that it's also interesting. We'll see as we go through the next couple of lines. Okay, so v'yichu elecha. Where have we seen those words questioned? V'yichu elecha. Amnon, I'm waiting for you. Well, Ryan is an idea. Where have we seen those ideas? Those two words questioned and explained at great length. V'atet tetzaves b'nei Yisrael v'yichu elecha shemen zayazach. Right? one of our 5 questions at the beginning of Atat Tzava. What was the question of V'yikwei Lecho? They're bringing to you the oil. Bringing to Moshe one at Aaron. Aaron's doing. Okay, so here too, who's going to sacrifice this paraduma? Well, no.
Oh, Aaron?
Well, actually not Aaron either, because Aaron has passed away in this parsha. So it's Elazar, Aaron's son. Okay. We're out of pamphlets. Don't lose your pamphlet, because I can always take another and make a copy, but making pamphlets, that's beyond my technical scope. I'm gonna have to get the office to make the pamphlets. Okay, so in V'atat Tzava we asked why is the oil being brought to Moshe because Aaron lights the menorah, and we gave an answer. Right? Okay, that Am Yisrael elevates Moshe Rabbeinu, etc., etc. Okay. And here we're going to have a similar question: Why is the power? Why are we bringing the power to Moshe? And this question is even more powerful because the para is now. We just learned from Rashi that the para is called Paras Moshe. It's called Moshe Rabbeinu's para. Moshe doesn't sacrifice the para. The Kohen sacrifices the para. Right? So why is it called Moshe's para? Right? And why are they bringing it to Moshe? Now, the Rebbe is going to give a very sophisticated answer to that question in the context of this Maimon. There is a Sikha in Chelik Lamed Gimel that also deals with the same question. When we go a little further, we'll talk about that Sikha today. Hopefully, we'll have time to talk about that Sikha that gives a different answer. Chukas in Chelik Lamed Gimel in Melukat Hei. V'tzarich la'avin. Hadirak para rishena asa Moshe. First basic question, only the first para Moshe did. Right? Without asking the question that we just asked. Wait a minute, Elazar Kohen did it, not Moshe. Okay, Seder, but even if you say Moshe did it on some level, Seder, it's only the first one in the Midbar. So why is it? There's 10 of them. Hadirak para rishena asa Moshe. V'lama nikras kol paras. Why are all of the paras? Shmeinas paras she'asu achar kach, the 8 that were done afterwards in Eretz Yisrael over the years. Now, of course, you didn't, once you have burnt the paraduma, so you have the ashes, so if you have to sprinkle the ash on someone, so the ashes are there in the base of Mikdash, so they didn't have to, sacrifice a paraduma every day in case someone came in contact with a dead person, which happened all the time, right? I mean, all of us are basically Tomei Meis. I mean, Kohanim have to be very, very careful not to be, which means don't ever go to a cemetery, right? The rest of us go to cemeteries. We walk out of the cemetery, Tomei Meis. Okay, so means.
What's Asha one more time?
What?
Asha Moshe. You said Asa Moshe.
Moshe did.
Or Asa.
Asa, he did, but Moshe did. Right? So they would have the ashes around, and they'd sprinkle the ashes on the person when he had to do that which was necessary to do to become tahor, so he could go into the base of Mikdash. Why would a person want to be tahor? Well, first of all, you want to be tahor. Second of all, in order to go into the base of Mikdash, you had to be tahor. If a person went into the base of Mikdash, tamei meis, so chiyuv misa, mina shemayim. It's not something to do.
Could they add other, just a technical question, could they add other ashes to it and then they became batal and became part of their heifer ashes, or it was?
No. It's not like red wine. It's not where you
A little bit, yeah.
No. Right. Bez Hashem, the Rebbe will start giving Keshel Bracha again very, 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 very soon. And we'll stop doing that also. We'll just have our Rebbe wine. Right? In the meantime, we're stuck with bittul. Okay. The Lamanikras Kola Parish, Shmeinis Parish also Acharkach, the 8 that were done afterwards throughout the next 900 years of Beis HaMikdash in Eretz Yisrael, right? 410 the first one, 420 the third, the second one, and 70 years in between. So it was 900 years once we got into Eretz Yisrael before the destruction of it's actually more, I'm sorry. It was 1400 years because it was 450 years before we built the first Beis HaMikdash. But so throughout that whole time, so there were 8 paras. And the 10th that Mashiach will do. V'gam para siris sheyaseh melech HaMashiach. Also, the 10th para that Melech HaMashiach will do Look at footnote 2. Rambam, Hilchas Paraduma, Sef Per Gimel. The Rambam paskins la halacha in Hilchas Paraduma. Rambam is a book of halacha. It's not a book of philosophical ideas. And the Rambam paskins la halacha. In Hilchas Paraduma, it's understood that the 10th para will be done by Mashiach, which itself is interesting. What Shevet is Mashiach? No, you're supposed to know that like this. What Shevet is Mashiach? Yehuda. Okay, that's also interesting, right? Doesn't sacrifice. Yehuda doesn't bring korbanos. Kohanim bring korbanos. Moshe is going to be bringing korbanos. Right? I'll wash his feet. Right? Expect to tell you that. I'm over the hill. I can't do anything. I'm allowed to open the gates. My kids make fun of me all the time. I missed the boat. It's all right. V'gam para Siddur shi'asa melech HaMashiach al shmei shel Moshe. All of them. So why are they all, that's our first question. Why are they all shaykh to Moshe? They're all called, according to Rashi, al shimcha, on your name. Why? Right, that basic question. There's going to be 3 levels to this question. Ulahoisif, to add, to alpia yadua, based on that which is known, shayichud v'emunah in Tanya, in Likutei Amarim, Sheshmei shall call davar, the name that something's called, asher yikru le, that it's called, the name of everything asher yikru le, that it is called, mera, instructs, teaches, al inyane v'teichne. Its content, its matter, what it is, what it's all about. A name is a very, very important thing. And the name of something defines the nature of that thing. Right? In Shayuchid Vamuna, what does the Rebbe mention in order to show us that so powerfully and clearly? First chapter in Shayuchid Vamuna in Tanya. If you don't know it, that's okay. If you do know it, so say it. Don't guess, though. Please don't guess. You never guess about truth. You can guess who's going to win the Super Bowl because it doesn't matter whether you're right or wrong. But truth matters. Okay. The Rebbe, what was the only thing Adam Arishan did in Gan Eden? Gave names to animals. What was the name? The name was the metaphysical source of that animal. So when he looked at a dog, what did he say? The godly energy being drawn down. When God created the world, what did he do? How did, so to speak, what did he do when he created the world? What does it say? How did he do it? He spoke. In other words, what's speech? Speech is taking something that's in you and allowing it to exist outside of you, okay, so to speak. Now, relative to you and I, it's not so to speak. Relative to God, it's so to speak, because there's nothing outside of God. Okay, so we are a figment of his imagination, so to speak. We live inside his head. He's called Hamakom, right? The place. Meaning it's not that the world is the place where you'll find God. God is the place where you'll find the world, right? So to speak, where's the world? In there, in the Eibishter. Okay, fine. But when the Eibishter thinks, he creates something real, right? When you and I think, you and I can only think about things that we have experienced outside of ourselves before we actually think about it. We can't create anything ex nihilo, anything that has never existed in our thought. We can be very creative and have a Zans that opens your cans, right? And that Zans will have, I don't remember exactly what the Zans looks like, but okay, I'll make it up. Yeah, it probably had gold teeth, right? Purple fur and 3 eyes and 4 fingers on one hand and 7 on the other, etc. Okay, purple exists, eyes exist, gold exists, fingers exist, 7 exists. 4. What does Dr. Seuss do in his interesting imagination? Just put it all together in interesting, unusual, and creative ways. But he didn't create anything that didn't exist before, because you and I can't do that. Only the Eibishter does. Right? So you and I, our thought by definition is connected to something that exists outside of us already. And then you and I think about it. Right? So that's why I can't think about something that I've never experienced. Right? I don't know what it is, because I've never experienced it, so I can't even think about thinking about it. Right? Because it's out. Right? Okay. I can think about what it might be like to travel in space, because I know that that's happened to someone else. But obviously my thought process in that would be fairly lacking in sophistication because I've never experienced it, right? Okay, but someone else did, so at least I can imagine what that looks like. Maybe someone who lived 500 years ago, since he saw space, might imagine what it would be like to be up there. But their imagination about that would be very different than yours and mine, because you and I actually know, we've seen pictures up there, right? We've seen people flying around up there. Okay, fine. And some other things, not only people, also people who, work in movies. Things that work in movies, even they flew up there. Not just people. Other things. Hollywood stars, they flew up there. There's people who've gone, Hollywood stars have gone, some different things have gone. Okay. So you can think about that. Something that doesn't exist, you can't think about it. The Eibishter, the only reason the thing exists is because he thinks about it. Or thought about it. I mean, there's no past, present, future in the Eibishter, so it's not thinks there, it's to keep thinking. But that thought of the Eibishter is what gives that thing its existence. Okay. So the expression of that, the revelation of that, you and I call speech. Because what's speech? Speech is revealing thought outside of itself. If you want to know what I'm thinking, well, I'll tell you. I'll speak, and then you'll know what I'm thinking. So to speak, the reality that how the Torah describes creation, HaKadosh Baruch Hu spoke, and this happened. In other words, he brought about a reality of something, so to speak, outside of himself. Now, it's not outside of himself, beside it, but as if it is. That's how it experiences itself, as being outside of him. Okay. And that's called speech. So therefore, what are the metaphysical building blocks of that thing? That's a Chaf Lamed base. Adam HaRishon looks at that and says, oh wow, that's a Chaf Lamed base. It's called a Kelef. Oh, that's an Aleph Reish Yud. That's a lion. Oh, that's a Sadi base Yud. That's a deer, Tzvi. He could see, what's the metaphysical periodic table of everything? The letters of the Aleph base that are the metaphysical source of that. What's the physical source of that? Well, bring it to a chemist. He'll tell you what what chemicals are in there and what, that's the periodic table in Gashmias. Okay, so this is NaCl. That's what this is. This is a little bit of, what's Na? Sodium, right? I never got that one, right? Why is sodium anyway? Why is it anyway? Right, right, and chloride, right? Yeah, chlorine. Okay, chlorine. Okay, so this is a little Na and a little Cl, and you put them together and put your challah in it, right? Okay, 3 times. Okay, good. That's what it is in Gashmias. What is it in Ruchnias? Mem Lamed Ches. That's the source of that stuff. Okay, so that's what Adam HaRishon looked at, and that's what Adam HaRishon saw. You and I can't do that, but if you're Adam HaRishon, that's what you can do. Probably Chava told him, oh, come on, and he agreed with Chava at the end. Okay. So that which something's called has a lot to do with its essence and what it's really all about. So if we're calling the Para Duma Paras Moshe, this is the second level of the question. That must mean that there's a very powerful connection of this Para to Moshe, not just it happens to be that it's V'yichoi Lecho for some reason. No. The name of something is very powerfully connected to the essence of that thing. That's why parents are given Ruach HaKodesh to give a name to their child. So when people complain about names that parents gave, it's like a funny thing to complain about. I understand. There's some Ruach HaKodesh involved in this. Why so you, inside your seichel, think they should have given another name? I don't know. This is the Ruach HaKodesh. That parent at that time was to give that name. Move on there. Therefore, it's understood. The zeh shekol haparas nikrais al shmei shel Moshe, that which all of these cows, the paraduma, are called al shmei shel Moshe, hu lefisha zeh, that this idea shaychus l'Moshe, this relevance to Moshe in Yonim v'Tekra, has something to do with the very nature of the paraduma. a deeper understanding of the basic question. The first question was textual. It says V'yichu elecha. Why does it say V'yichu elecha? Oh, because all of the paras are called Al Shem Moshe. So obviously I would ask why. Right? The second level of that question is the very fact that all the paras are called Al Shem Moshe seems to indicate that there's a very powerful connection between the para and Moshe. What is that connection? Based on this, we have to understand on a deeper third level, or yes, even more. Zesha paras nikrois Al Shem Moshe, that which all the paras are called Al Shem Moshe, Hari Asiyas paras Haisal Yedei Kohanim. The paras were done, Asiyah, the actual doing of the sacrificing of the para was done by the Kohanim. Right? Again, the Rebbe brings the Rambam. V'gam parisheni, even the first one, Nasasal Yedei Elazar HaKohen, was done by Elazar HaKohen, not Aaron HaKohen. Aaron HaKohen had already passed away. Parshas Chukas. Parshas Chukas is an interesting parsha. What happens in Parshas Chukas in the Torah? And you know, when I ask you these questions, if you don't know the answer, that doesn't mean that Mashiach isn't coming and you're a horrible human being, right? It just means that there's information that you don't have yet. But when we learn the information, remember it. So if I would ask you again tomorrow, you could answer the question. Because if you hear it today and you can't remember it tomorrow, so then stama bracha levatol. Right? Parsha Chukas is a very interesting parsha. It starts in the second year and ends in the 40th year. The 38 years in the desert, which basically aren't discussed in the whole Torah. The first year and a half are discussed, and the last section of time is discussed, mostly the last 37 days, right? From Rosh Chodesh Shvat until Zayin Adar. Right? That's all of Devar. Chukas is near the end of Bamidbar. So the end of Bamidbar talks about the beginning of the 40th year. So it goes, and what happened? Two major events happened in Parshas Chukas. The passing of Miriam and the passing of Aaron. By the end of Parshas Chukas, Moshe is the only one left. Of the three Nasim of that generation, the three leaders of that generation. Moshe, Aaron, and Miriam. Which must have been rather difficult for Moshe. He had no one to talk to. He had no one to talk to even before. But now he really has no one to talk to. I mean, when even before, when the Yidden start picking on him, who does he go to? He goes to the Hebrew States. What do you want from me? But ma'atu skuluni, they're going to stone me. What do you want from me? Who's Moshe got to talk to when things get tough? It's the only, got no one to talk to. He's going to go talk to Aaron. I was going to say, I don't know what it means to be you. I don't know what it means to be Moshe Rabbeinu. I mean, okay, I've got my place in this whole thing, but I'm not you. I haven't got a clue what it means to be you. Can talk to his wife? Can't talk to his wife. She'll be understanding. Oh, that must be horrible. Right? The loneliest place in the world. Interesting enough, what we just learned in a Yom. Was the Chiddush of the Alter Rebbe? 2 days ago, we learned in a Yom.
No Chassidim are alone.
Beautiful. Right? Was the Chiddush of the Alter Rebbe that the Rebbe is not alone and the Chassidim are alone? Until the Alter Rebbe. It says in the Yom, until the Alter Rebbe, basically the Rebbe was alone. Moshe Rabbeinu was alone. Along came the Alter Rebbe and somehow brought about this connection of Rebbe Chassid, which is so powerful that not only the Chassidim not alone, but even the Rebbe is not alone.
Why? Why wasn't he Baal Shem Tov and the Maggid Mezrich?
It's a good question. I don't know the answer to the question. I don't know. I mean, you could bring about it, I mean, in terms of, seichel and what that, what Chabad is all about, and, bringing it into your seichel, and but it's a good question.
How do we know that until Alter Rebbe Moshe was alone?
How do we know Moshe was alone?
Until Alter Rebbe, why
because the Rebbe wrote a book. The first book our Rebbe ever wrote was called a Yom, right, which is a daily.
No.
Okay, so which you'll hear from the man on my left. 2-3 days ago. That's what the Rebbe writes in the Emir. That one of the chedushim of the Alter Rebbe was, one of the unique things that the Alter Rebbe did was bring about a situation that the Rebbe is not alone in the Chassidim. The Rebbe said. And I wasn't around before that, so I don't know what, so what did it look like? I don't know. We're sort of used to what we're used to. Right? Not being alone. When you have an issue, you can use someone to turn to. We'll see what Moshe is really all about. Let's just finish the paragraph because it's 8:30. And you know how I'm such a stickler for 8:30. Well, Pizet Tzarech Lahavin, let's just start there. Od Yesed Zesha Paras Nikas Al Shem Mesha. I see a surprise. I saw there Kehanim Begam Par Rishena. Second last line. Forget that last word on the. Right, Begam Par Rishena. Necessal Yidei Elazar Akayim. Upedish Para Sha'asa Mesha. Hu Lechura Rak is probably, the Rebbe says, Lechura seems at first glance. Rak Shenasa saw that it was done al pi harosei v'tzivuya. It was done by virtue of his instruction and his command. He didn't do it. He just told Elazar to do it. Umahi shaychusa l'Moshe. So what's the relevance to Moshe? So this is the third level of it all. First level is the pasuk says v'yicho elecha. So it's, and Rashi explains that it's connected to Moshe. The second level was that the name of something, if the fact that it's called Paras Moshe means that there's some sort of essential and very powerful connection to Moshe. And the third level of the question is, Moshe didn't even do it. So how in the world is it so powerfully connected to him? And what does it mean that it's so powerfully connected to him? It came from his command, but not from his action. Umahi sheichus l'Moshe va'ad, to such an extension, it's called by his name. Look at footnote 6. Al derech parasiris, like the 10th para. She yasa melech HaMashiach. The melech HaMashiach will do, like we saw, the Rambam. Sha'peirush b'pashtus. The simple explanation, who? Leisha Mashiach atzmei yasa, not the Mashiach himself will actually sacrifice the korban. Why? Ki asiyas apara, because the actual sacrifice of the korban, of the animal, has to be done by a kayin. Mashiach will tell the kayin to sacrifice the paraduma. And yet it's called, the Rambam says that Mashiach will do the korban. It's a very interesting language of the Rambam. The Rambam's very careful in his words. The korban that Mashiach will ya'aseh, so simple translation, do, but obviously sacrifice. But he's not really sacrificing. But it's being sacrificed based on his command, and therefore somehow it's connected to him very, very powerfully. Now simply, because it's late, we'll continue talking about this tomorrow morning, the fact that there's a command is what's called in Chassidus and Asinus koyach, an empowerment. What gives you and I the ability to take physical reality and elevate it to a state of godliness? The command of the Eibishter to take that physical object and use it for a mitzvah. Without that command, we couldn't do it. The command is the Nesinus Koyach. That's the empowerment to do it. Nesinus Koyach. Netinat Koach. Giving of power. Right? Empowerment. How are we able to do that? We're able to do that because the Eibishter tells us to do it. And because the Eibishter tells us to do it, that gives us the ability to do it. And tzaddikim daimim lebaira, right? Chazal tell us that tzaddikim are similar to their creator. Everybody's created in the image of the Eibishter, but tzaddikim, and it's much more revealed because they're godly people. So by tzaddikim, what are tzaddikim? What did tzaddikim also do? What does Moshe do? What does Mashiach do? Gives us commands, tells us to do things. Okay, so Moshe, by virtue of Moshe telling Elazar to do it, that's an Asinus Koyach, that's an empowerment to Elazar to bring about whatever reality the Paraduma is supposed to bring about. So he's enough, the Eibishter asks it to happen through Moshe, as opposed to the Eibishter talking to Elazar Kohen. The Eibishter knows how to talk to Aaron Kohen. There's psukim in the Torah, Yadav Hashem El Aaron Kohen. But it's through Moshe. And that empowerment comes through Moshe. Okay, we'll see where we're going with this tomorrow.
And right to that question number one, is this the same question from as in Dr. Kaplan, or is this?
Well, the same question, give me a completely different answer.
Okay, but the question, and then the second line is the Lam Yikres the second line is the Lam Yikres Shemecha. Is Shemecha God's name or is Shemecha
Moshe. Moshe, that's what we don't understand.
He's Rebbe Kaplan and welcome back.
Back, welcome, thank you.